I'd like to welcome everyone to the Brantford Mayor's Housing Task Force and any of those members of the public who may be viewing in. We do have quorum, and I just want to remind people that if we lose quorum for some reason, we recess immediately, and then we can't reestablish quorum within 15 minutes. We then have to adjourn. Hopefully, we're not going to get into that. So, first of all, before we call the roll, I want to say thank you very much, especially to the section leaders. There's some excellent reports that we'll be considering today, some very interesting PowerPoint presentations as well. I think we're well on our way to preparing a final task force report for submission to the county, Council of Brant County, and also City Council here in Brantford. And I think I'm quite optimistic this is going to give us a good roadmap for addressing effectively the housing issues we have in our community, whether that be for affordable, supportive, private housing, affordable for family members. I think we've done an excellent job, and I think we're about 70–80% of the way there. So great progress. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to do this. So with that, I'll ask the clerk staff to take the roll call, please. All right.
Thank you. Mayor Bailey?
I'm here, thank you.
Councillor McCreary? Councillor Howes?
Here.
Councillor Weaver?
Present.
Dan Brooks? Andy Joseph?
Here.
Heather Moore?
Here.
Lori-Ann Gagne? Lori McIntyre?
I'm here.
Graham Kubit? I can see you, Graham.
Here.
Odette Gomes? David Prang?
Present. Hello.
Thank you. Jennifer Canning? Natasha Dobler?
Present.
Teresa Percival?
Here.
MPP Boma? And Don Lee. Okay, thank you, Don. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. So we do have a quorum. So as we always, just a quick brief review of the rules in place for virtual meetings. Ask that all members, if you please to remain muted unless you're speaking to reduce annoying feedback. All web cameras shall remain turned on. So even if you're going to get a glass of water, please leave your video on so you continue to count for quorum. Staff will request to join us, and there are a number of staff coming through various parts of the presentation. We bring them in virtually. For this round, I'll be doing the voting by asking if anybody objects to physically raise their hand. But if you want to speak to an item, please use the participants box, because I'm monitoring that, and hit that raised hand button. And then once you've spoken, staff here helping with the meeting, they'll take your hand down. As I said previously, if we have an interruption or we lose quorum, we immediately recess and hopefully reconvene within 15 minutes with quorum and with the connection. If we can't, then the meeting's automatically adjourned. So that's it. Anybody have a pecuniary interest that they wish to declare for the purpose of any item that's on our agenda this afternoon? And just physically raise your hand if you're in that category. Not seeing any raised hands. So we don't have any delegations. So we'll now move into item 4, which is items for consideration. We've got a few of them. Let's start with item 4.1. So this is the project team updates and discussing next steps. So Mary Ellen McClellan, I think you're here. If you can give us a verbal response to questions that were raised at our last meeting.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, for the benefit of the task force, there were a couple of questions asked last time, and we have come prepared with those responses. The one question was in regards to providing an update on the secondary suite already completed in the city-owned housing. In 2018, a secondary suite, and it is my understanding, yes, that we no longer refer to them as secondary suites, now accessory dwellings, was added to 702 Colburn Street. And this was a one-room, self-contained, short-term homelessness unit, and it's 336 square feet, and it was developed at a cost of $65,000. So currently, the official plan, policies, and related zoning regulations allow for one additional dwelling unit that can be located on an existing dwelling or in an accessory structure. So Bill 108 now allows for up to 2 additional accessory dwelling units for a total of 3 dwelling units to be permitted on one single piece of property or one home, semi-detached or street townhouse dwelling. Housing staff is currently reviewing the potential for a 3rd unit at this address by creating the existing garage into a unit. The existing garage is approximately 600 square feet, and the approximate price at this time for the conversion would be $185,000. The second question was in relation to Laurier Brantford interest in building more residences or partnering with the city on affordable housing builds. And the response received was that Laurier has advised that there's no interest in building a new residence at this point in time. Their focus will be on development of the One Market Square. They would consider possibly partnering on a residence with the city in the future, but currently they have no plans. Thank you.
That it, Mary Ellen?
That's it.
All right. So does anyone have any questions? I don't see any raised hands. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mary Ellen. We appreciate you working to get us an answer to the questions that were raised at our last meeting. So let's move then to item 4.1.2, a very interesting report, the inventories and mapping team. And I believe we have Kevin O'Hara, who is our manager of the housing services here to discuss this report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and greetings to you, Mayor Bailey, and all of the task force members. It's great to see you. So I'll speak briefly to inventory and mapping project team update. We've continued our discussions in our meetings over the past several weeks, and we're happy to provide the latest versions of the mapping for the city of Brantford and the county of Brant. And we've also will include, and we've done a chart that is included on the report showing in the interest of councillors in the city of Brantford, the percentage and the number of units of existing community housing units that are broken down by ward. So that will be included and will overlay in the city of Brantford mapping the ward boundaries in the final mapping version. It'll give a good indication of how I know Brantford City Council has made the motion previously of making sure that we spread out community housing, and there certainly are concerns about not concentrating community housing or affordable housing locations in a given ward. So we'll certainly keep those boundaries as committed to under the Housing Master Plan to look at distributing community housing equitably. So that's the intent of providing those definitions and figures that we have, and we'll make that part of the final mapping, as I mentioned. We also did a couple of updates to the maps. I know the County of Brant added the Trillium Way location, which is up for development within the next couple of years. So that's been added as well. And then we did have some results and some feedback from our social media and our mentorship projects, and great kudos again to the mentorship project team. They're doing some great work, and we had some responses from about 7 different entities, persons or corporations that are interested in doing some development over and above just developers that have approached the Housing Services Department about a component of affordable housing that might be available for development charge waivers. In the past, we've had these 7 new entities, and we're continuing to do outreach to them, and there's at least 1 or 2 that might end up being added to the map. They seem that they could be interested interested in affordable housing location, and the couple that are more, or the one that is more likely actually at this point is up in Ward 3, which is again contributing to the distribution of community housing throughout the city of Brantford. And then, as noted, there are one in Paris as well is also interested, so that's the county location. And that's the update from the inventory mapping team, including the updated maps. Available for any questions, of course. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. I should mention for those viewing in that you're referring to a written report that's part of the agenda for this meeting that we've all had. And if people are interested in looking at it, they just go to the city website, and under the Mayor's Housing Partnership Task Force agenda for today's meeting, they'll find it. So we do have some raised hands, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with Councillor House.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Davis, and through you to Kevin. Thanks for adding Trillium to the mapping, and along a similar tact, assuming that this report and mapping will eventually be part of our broader task force report and go to both councils. I was wondering if it's possible to add the county inventory to the inventory that you're showing broken down by ward in that last report that you were just discussing.
Well, certainly, just for clarification through the chair, Councillor, then we would like us to further enhance the county of Brant mapping to show wards as well as. Sorry,
not so much the mapping, but the report where you've got the table that explains the number of affordable housing units per ward in the city of Brantford. If our council is going to end up seeing this type of information as part of our final report, it would be, I think, beneficial to our cause to show the same type of inventory breakdown throughout the wards of the county of Brant.
Certainly, then through the chair, thank you for that clarification, and absolutely we can do that for sure.
Thank you.
Excited, Councillor House? Good point. Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Kevin. This is great information, Kevin, but I see that on the Grand River Ave, there's a very large apartment building complex being built. And it's not my ward, but I seem to recall that they received quite a bit of money from the government to make that some type of social housing. I'm not sure exactly which level it's going to be, but I see that's not on our map. So have we not included ones that are in process yet then?
Certainly, through the chair, thank you for the questioning, Councillor Weaver. Grand River Avenue is an interesting, that apartment building in that area of the city is interesting in that it received upper level government funding around brownfield redevelopment. And then at the time of that development being approved with that brownfield remediation funding approval, the city of Brantford's development charge bylaw, or I should say the housing facilities bylaw for development charge waivers for affordable housing, had the definition of affordable housing as being 100% of CMHC's average market rent. So because the bylaw at that time stated that's what we would do and grant some development charge waivers as a city to that property, we did carry on with that. And we do have a municipal housing facilities agreement in place with them. And it will be actually rented, all of the units in that apartment building will be rented at 100% of CMHC's average market rent for a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom as applicable. So we could certainly put it on the map in terms of, with a little bit of an asterisk, explaining that it's at 100% of CMHC's average market rent, which isn't truly deeply affordable, but in this environment of rental, the rental market, it is more affordable than other private developers or real estate investment trusts that are building apartments that are renting at 125 or 130% of average market rent. So I hope I've explained it and captured why we didn't put it on the map so far. We can certainly include it with a little bit of an explanation if that's what you would like, for sure, if the task force would prefer that.
Yes, I think just so we're getting a true showing of what we have available
Absolutely.
as a city. And do you know what that 100% of the CMHC's rate is?
Well, through the chair, Councillor, I believe, and I'm going by memory, so
Yeah, I won't hold you to it.
I'm fairly certain that the CMHC's average market rent for 2019 for a one-bedroom was around $1,000 a month, maybe 967 to 1,000. I'm not quite sure, and I believe a one-bedroom was up over, or I mean a two-bedroom, excuse me, was closer to $1,100 per month. So it's that sort of level of rents. We'll get that information absolutely, and actually we could even include that example on the mapping in that little note that we can make regarding that property.
Perfect, thank you. And then if I could just add one other question, and please just let me know if we're going to cover this later on in the meeting. But I see that in your presentation you make mention of several organizations that are looking to participate and potentially have some builds on their land or be part of the process. So we've identified these areas. Now, how do we go about prioritizing which ones we're going to do first?
Well, certainly through the chair, we would work with those organizations, and what we're determining right now actually is what level of affordability they'd be looking at. And a couple of the interested parties are similar to the Grand River building that you mentioned previously, Councillor, in that they would like to build a component of affordable rents mixed in with a large majority of market rent units. And I think there's ways that we can support them as staff with that desire to do that development, just as we do with other private sector developers. But if the parties are truly interested in building a range of affordable housing similar to John Noble Apartments, where about a third to a half are affordable rents and the rest are market, to get that mixed income model that we all desire in the community, then those are the ones that we would prioritize through the Mayor's Task Force and the Housing Master Plan for sure.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll have more questions as we go through. Thank you.
Kevin, I have a question. So what we're capturing on this map would be one, city-owned properties that are available, or properties owned by one of our housing corporations, including the County of Brant. And then there would be, let's say, nonprofit charitable organizations that are interested and have expressed an interest, their lands would appear. If there's a private developer that's said that they're interested and they've contacted us through the survey, they appear, correct, their lands?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through in answer to your question, we would get their permission for sure to include them on the mapping.
How do we deal with properties that are privately owned that aren't on our list but could be available for purchase? I'm thinking in particular, you know, we've seen some service organizations, a couple of legions in particular, that have announced publicly that they're merging with other legions, and thus one or two properties become surplus and, you know, will be sold. How do we deal, let's call them, with potential properties? I know there's a privacy issue, but let's say that they are potential properties that either we might be interested in as a city or perhaps one of our partners. How do we deal with that?
That's a great question, Mr. Mayor. I would look to, I'm not sure if Mary Ellen wants to pipe in here as well, but we do work closely with legal and real estate services with the City of Brantford, and knowing how important getting more investment in affordable housing is, we would conduct frequent scans of those opportunities and certainly work with legal and real estate on whether or not acquiring or getting some sort of notification out to our community housing partners that these properties are becoming available and might be available in terms of an affordable method of acquiring an existing building and looking at renovating and conversion into housing opportunities. I think that's what I would suggest in this case. We do work pretty closely. As I said, we're in touch with the legal and real estate folks with the City of Brantford pretty frequently about what properties are available. I'm not sure if Mary Ellen wants to pipe in anymore.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, in support of Kevin, absolutely. We are looking at every property. And in fact, we are scanning and working with real estate closely to identify potential opportunities to tie those properties into existing grants that are now available, such as the rapid rehousing. So we know that some of these grants are very time limited. So it's important that we scan the real estate market and look for opportunities to link those properties and perhaps go through a purchase and or some way of linking that to a grant application so that we can move forward with affordable housing.
So we wouldn't add those properties into this map because there'd be like, well, privacy issues for one. Because any properties listed here is listed with consent and approval. But if a group, let's say it's Indwell, and they're interested in looking at properties and they wanted to kind of get the same information, which would not be available on the website, I assume they would just contact either yourself or Kevin.
Through the mayor, yes, absolutely. If there was any interest in a piece of land and we could work together with some other form of incentives, then by all means we would add that to the mapping once we had permission and maybe had a plan going forward.
Okay. Lori from JC Homes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm just curious to why our 89 houses aren't listed on this map. They're all either RGI or affordable rent houses. And I know majority of them are like multiple units. So I thought, is that the reason why the single family dwellings aren't included?
Through the chair, thanks for the question, Lori. And yes, because they are single detached largely in terms of the JC portfolio and they're spread out in different areas, again, we could certainly list them as existing inventory. But the one exception that is there that also has to be adjusted are the Woodlawn Meadow single and semi-detached units in the city's portfolio, which are being sold as they become vacant. So there's adjustments like that. So we can certainly include in the legend or just a notation about those JC single detached homes that are spread through the community in different areas.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Lori. So not seeing, if you want to ask a question, hit that raised hand button. Not seeing any more raised hands. So Kevin and Mary Ellen, thank you very much for that presentation. And more importantly, all the work that's been done at that and your working group. It's a lot of work, but obviously very helpful for not only ourselves, the county, but also some of our other partners and potential partners that might be interested. So let's move on then to item 4.1.3. I think it's fairly short. It's the financial options team. We have Brian Hutchings, who's the Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Brantford. We have in our package a written report. I think it's dated October 1st. Mr. Hutchings, is there anything verbally you want to add to that for the benefit of the members? I saw him in the participants box.
Mayor Davis, I
think he's probably in a, I think he's probably in a very important telephone call. A few things going on today that require his attention. So can you pinch hit?
Sure. You know what, I can just confirm that there was no additional information to be presented today. So I actually didn't realize the memo from October 1st was in the package today either. But that is the most recent and complete information that we do have from the financial options team's perspective. So nothing further to add for today.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any raised hands. So let's move on then to 4.1.4, the mentorship program team. And I'm proud of all the work we've all done, but this mentorship program team, I think they've really outdone themselves, and an excellent PowerPoint, I believe, that they'll be sharing with us. And I think, Lorianne, are you going to be doing this or?
Yes, I will be. Thank you, Mayor Davis.
Oh, there we are. We're sharing it already. So great.
Woohoo, we're ready to go. Included in the package was a very brief one-page report letting the task force know that our little subcommittee met twice since the last meeting, primarily to review some of the results that were coming in from the survey. And Kevin has already alluded to, we were starting to incorporate those results from the survey. Anybody who said they were interested in developing or that they might have land, we were ensuring to link with the mapping exercise so that we could get them there. And we started to speak about what do we do as next steps. So now we have sort of a little list of mentees and mentors, and what do we do about that, as well as this introductory presentation. So we will go through the PowerPoint presentation, but we had suggested sort of two approaches where we arrange an initial meeting with mentees. So those are people looking to get help, looking for assistance. So we have to keep in mind that they're not the ones offering to be mentors, so don't have a lot of development experience. I only mention that so that as we go through this presentation, you keep in mind that it's very, very basic. It's the literally, where do I start? I don't know anything. I have an idea. Where do I start? So it's designed very, very preliminary level. And then we thought if there's some success with that, we might be able to arrange like a speed dating exercise between mentors and mentees. This is what we have to offer. This is what we have to offer. Where is the best connection? So sort of a two-pronged approach. Happy to go through the presentation, give everybody a preview of what we're thinking. The agenda would be, I have to remember to say next slide, why do we need more affordable housing in the community? We thought it was important to address some common myths right up front. Why is it not happening already? Stages of development, I'll stress there that it's very simplistic in this section. And then we highlight a recent example. Next slide. So why we might need more affordable housing. That's very interesting with all of you on the screen. I can't see the whole thing. There we go. Because we believe our community thrives when everyone has a place to call home. There are individuals and families in our community who are homeless or at risk of homeless or are living in housing that's not safe, not affordable, or not in good condition, and that the demand for affordable housing far exceeds the current supply. Next slide. We continue. Why do we need? It's the responsibility of all sectors to get involved, public, not-for-profit, and private. Housing is just a part of a larger complex issue of poverty. So building more affordable housing is only part of the solution, but a very important part. In addition to that, we have to look to preserving existing affordable housing supply. We have to look at poverty reduction, increasing good employment and educational opportunities. You will note, I'll pause here, that throughout this presentation, we give the little hints to see the CMHC link, and of course we'll provide the link at the end, but there's additional resource materials that relate to each of these slides. Next slide. Then to demonstrate the need for affordable housing, to point out that the average vacancy right now and I hope that's all of Brantford, is 1.4% in 2018, whereas a healthy vacancy rate is 3%. Next slide. We demonstrate that rental prices have increased 22% from 2018 to 2021. Next slide. And that the affordable housing wait list has currently approximately 1,700, in 2019 had 1,700 households, some waiting 9 to 12 years, which is a really long time to wait for affordable housing. Next slide. 23% of households, or 12,000 households, spend 30% or more of their income on shelter costs in 2016. 8.9% of households, so 5,498 households in 2016, were in core need. We do provide a glossary to indicate what core need means. And of course, the area is forecasting a population growth of almost 20,000 by 2031. So the need is going to grow. Next slide. Oh, this is reserved for a video, which we won't go to right now, on the YouTube link about housing in Brantford. Then we turn our attention to some common myths that often hold people back from considering affordable housing, that their property values will go down. And in reality, there are many studies on affordable housing that conclude there is no impact on property values. Myth number 2, there will be a strain on public services and infrastructure, when in reality, generally, higher density housing needs less extensive infrastructure than new development, if it's single family dwellings. Features like pipe water, sewer services, schools, and roads already exist. Higher density developments and infill can provide the larger customer base needed to increase the range and quality of already available services such as public transit. So it helps the economy overall. Next slide. A myth that traffic will increase. Multi-family dwellings near quality transit services are likely to attract residents with lower levels of car ownership, as are dwellings geared to older people or people with disabilities and families with lower incomes. The new residents won't fit into the neighborhood. Again, a myth. Often future occupants of new affordable housing already live in the neighborhood, and most new developments are mixed income, as Kevin alluded to, and are inclusive communities to provide housing opportunity for all. Next slide. I think these are the last ones. Myth number 5, affordable housing won't fit the character of the neighborhood. Well, in fact, affordable housing must comply with the same building restrictions and design standards as market rate housing, and very often is designed to fit in with the character of the neighborhood. Finally, myth number 6, crime will increase. Again, a reality. A Canadian study of 146 supportive housing sites concluded there was no statistically significant evidence that supportive housing led to the increased rates of reported violent property, criminal mischief, disorderly conduct, or total crimes. It's a myth. Next slide, please. So if those are all myths, then why is affordable housing not happening already? Well, in fact, there are some affordable housing developments happening, but it's not enough to meet demand. And partly because it can be a difficult process to develop, needing the need to find appropriate land. Funding, of course, is always a challenge, but the opportunity is now, as there are funding opportunities out there. Making it a priority when we are faced with so many other social challenges, but remember, a place to call home is the foundation. Not enough interest or capacity, and that's what we're here for, is to help increase that interest and capacity, not knowing where to start or how to get involved. Next slide, please. Then we'll quickly review, and again, in a very high level, very simplistic form, stages of development for those considering. So let's talk about getting started. Getting started is sort of the next slide, please. Things to think about. You have to start to ask yourself a few questions. Do you or your group have an interest in developing affordable housing? You probably do if you're taking part in this webinar. Do you own any land and or buildings that might be suitable? Do you have any experience and or knowledge to contribute? And are there any partners you can help with this? There are no right or wrong answers to these questions. These are just questions for you to consider. Next slide, please. Then you can start to become informed. Invite experts to share their knowledge, or read local reports and plans, do research on what's happening in other communities, discuss your ideas with others. Next slide. Find a group to join and or create your own, and there are staff that will help you with this. You will need to be incorporated as a not-for-profit or a business corporation to access the funding and to develop properly. You can also apply to become a charity, depending on the focus area, if you intend to fundraise and provide receipts. Again, we provide a helpful hint to see the CMHC link called Building Your Team. Next slide. Things that you can do to continue your getting started: review your current abilities and capacity. Assess your knowledge, abilities, capacity. Once again, there's a checklist provided. Find partners who can bring missing skills or resources. So just because you're missing a skill, don't abandon the idea just yet. Determine if you're prepared to move forward or if you need additional expertise, such as a development consultant. Next slide. You can make your existence known, and it's best to connect with housing services at the City of Brantford early, at which point you can decide if you want to continue. Next slide. And if you do, let's start talking land, development preparation. Do you already own the property you want to develop? Does it have any buildings currently on the site? If they're in good shape or have historic designation, they may be suitable to be part of a new building design. I couldn't help but hear you mention the legions. They don't necessarily have to lose their legion space if they were to develop affordable housing with it, so there can be a win-win. If they're not in good shape or undesirable, they'll need to go through a demolition process. And have you considered that? Next slide. Does the property have any concerns, such as floodplain contamination? Does it already have accesses to services such as water and sewer? What's the size of the property? Why is that important? Because it would determine the size and footprint of the development. What's the current zoning? This will determine what's allowed to be developed. And once again, we provide the link, creating a development plan from CMHC. Next slide. Further questions: what are the property's bylaws? The requirements around parking and building setbacks? Does the property have any restrictions, such as height, number of units? If you don't have land, do you have ideas of what land you are interested in obtaining or what size of property you need? Next slide. And then we loop them back. Connect with planning services, City of Brantford, and you'll see at the end, or the housing services staff, who will help you figure out some of the answers to these questions if you need help. And once again, we provide the helpful link, local planning processes. Next slide. As part of development preparation, you have to consider your finances. So what assets do you already have to contribute? What are you able to finance or borrow? What's the manageable debt? Do you have any operating funding to contribute or just capital funding? Are there other funding opportunities available? And do you have some ballpark analysis? So again, there is a link to test financial feasibility early on into a development or a project. Next slide, please. Other things you can do, and this is important to note, to apply to CMHC for seed funding for soft costs very early on, because some of that funding can help you with these determinations, all these questions we're throwing at you. Now it's time to do very preliminary designs of the building, secure the funding, obtain the other approvals, and find a builder, which is when you'll move into construction. Next slide. At that point, it's time to start considering the actual build, ensuring permits. This is where it's very, very simplistic. We all know the construction process is much more detailed than this, but ensure all permits and financing are in place, create a plan to market units, prepare for the management, or at least consider the ongoing management once it is built. Are you going to hire staff? Are you going to manage this internally, or are you going to contract with an external group? You monitor the construction process, complete all deficiencies. Next slide. You ensure adequate staffing. You have to put some attention towards the tenant wait list and selection so that you're ready to arrange for move-ins, welcome the new occupants, and then of course celebrate through official opening. Next slide. We provide an example recently completed in June of 2018 to show that it's a mixed income and to show the levels of funding that can go in and that can be secured to cover the total capital costs. Next slide. We provide a glossary of terms, which I won't go through, but things that, as we were mentioning them in the slides, we thought important that people know what we are referring to. And then the resources, additional websites they can visit. Next slide. And a thank you. And I do want to extend a huge thanks to the mentorship team who's been meeting and providing the input, and a special shout out to the brand new manager of marketing and communications that Victoria Park hired, who was willing to jump in and try to clean it up and make it pretty. I will pause there and welcome any questions on either the report or the presentation, and hope that Deb Schlichter is right there to jump in and help me. If you ask me a question, I get something.
Yeah, and I like that that last slide, Lorianne, giving the names of the people that not only the members of the task of this particular subworking group, but also a lot of staff people involved in preparing it as well. And a very professional PowerPoint. I think it's going to be a great tool for us. And we do have a question. So Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is more of a comment, I guess, first, before I go into my questions. So item number 6, as we were going through, it starts at the very front and it explains the myths. I certainly agree with everything that's there. However, folks might be aware that our Marlene Ave location has had some media attention. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that when we get asked questions from the public about, well, what about Marlene Ave? That's not an affordable housing location. I think people are going to get that confused as we try to bring some of these other builds forward. And Marlene might be used as an excuse why we should not do that and move forward. So just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as, you know, how to respond to those types of questions about Marlene Ave. And then my question is, so this was an excellent package. So is the intent to create a package and deliver that out to folks to try to get their attention to see if there's interest? Is that what the process is going to be after this?
In our report, we are recommending as a first step that all of the people, those organizations that completed the surveys saying we want to be a mentee or we're interested but don't know where to start, that we invite them to a scheduled webinar presentation to get them started. That was one step. And then we as a group, a subcommittee, said we would meet again because we were looking for your feedback. We had those 2 ideas, the targeted webinar for those who have expressed interest, arranging that type of speed dating mentorship meet mentee type of setting. And we didn't know if you would have some additional ideas, and we're happy to consider them. And we've scheduled another meeting to take your feedback from today and do anything we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Just my thought about the package when we're giving that out to folks. I just thought it would be value added if we could maybe get a letter from Mayor Davis and Mayor Bailey, just sort of to explain. And I think having something from the mayors will really help set the stage with, you know, how serious this process actually is. And then my next question is, so the presentation was a very high level. I'm curious as to if we should scope down a little bit more and look at the financial cost. So, you know, obviously the city has permit fees and all these other things. And I think there's opportunities for us to waive some of those fees. And I think it might paint a really good picture if we showed what our normal fee structure is. And then if you're going to be part of this initiative, what savings because of you know, possible reductions the city may be able to provide people, just to show what the difference is. And that's my questions. Thanks.
A lot of those were kind of comments and suggestions. Perhaps, I don't know if Deb is here, or would it be Kevin or Mary Ellen might speak to that?
It's Deb Schlichter here, yes, and unfortunately I can't use my video. It's not working. Apologies, but through you, Mr. Mayor, those are great ideas we can add to the presentation and put in some more details about what incentives are available to help in terms of financial incentives. So that's a great suggestion. And we are looking for ways to use this presentation, and there are a number of opportunities that we will want to take forward. So any ideas would be helpful.
Yeah, and I certainly, Deb, I certainly thought that Councillor Weaver's suggestion about myth 6, I mean, the word supportive is used in there, and the wording throughout most of the myths is affordable. So it'd be more appropriate to use that wording there, supporting certain issues. But and also, Lorianne, of course, we have the city's housing annual seminar coming up, which I don't have the date memorized, but it's November 20th. So I would think this would be maybe the first public introduction of it. I realize we may not have by then, we won't have council approval for the housing task force, but this is such a great piece, and there's a lot of great pieces in the working groups, but this is a little jewel what we've got here, and maybe start using it once we've made a few of these additions and corrections. My suggestion for what it's worth. Anyways, thank you very much, Lorianne, to you and your working group. That was great. So we'll now move on to Graham for the verbal update, the joint application team. So Graham from Indwell. There you are, Graham.
Great, thanks very much, Mayor Davis. I was very late in sending my presentation, so apologies that it didn't make it onto the full agenda, but I do believe that, I see it there, Laurie's got it, thank you. So one of the key things that we've been working on, obviously with the Joint Application Task Force, is the idea of how do we actually work together as a community to put in applications to senior levels of government, particularly related to solving the housing crisis that we're all experiencing. The work of the location task force and the sites, that's very important as part of this process. So I put together a little bit of a slideshow of some of the strategies that we could collectively work towards. The next slide, the next 3 slides or 4 slides are just for reference in terms of some of where my experience comes from in terms of the collaborative projects. The Perkins Center in Hamilton was one that we worked on with the service manager in Hamilton towards a new kind of housing. The next slide is a community in Oxford County where we worked again with the service managers, the county, and local social service agencies, Canadian Mental Health, etc., around creating a style of supportive housing which was not existent in the community. The next slide is Rudy Hulst Commons in Hamilton, where we built a new project, again, working with the municipality, working with other community agencies to say, how do we create supportive housing in a new context? The next picture is an example, again, in Woodstock. This one opened in 2019, where we're working with the Ministry of Health, the county, and other social services to provide a type of supportive housing to help people move out of hospital and move out of homelessness into permanent housing. The next example is was just opened a few weeks ago in Hamilton, and this is a joint application that we did with the church congregation, James North Baptist Church, to build a new church on the ground floor and 45 apartments upstairs. Each of these is an example of, I think the next slide is an example, each of those is an example of where one organization can't do something on its own, and it really does take working together to figure out a solution. We're all familiar with projects or properties like this. This was in Hamilton, an old rooming house and tavern. Next slide is how it would look like, and this was an inhabited room. When we took over, people were living in these conditions, and we're all aware that this is not an isolated incident, and these conditions exist elsewhere. The next slide is what it became, and the further slide is the same apartment. The next slide is the same apartment as that first one you saw, post renovation. So these kind of solutions are possible when we come together as a community. The next few slides are really where I'd like to sort of suggest we have an opportunity to go. We know that change isn't easy. takes problem solving, it takes developing the solution, and then it takes implementation. We've been discussing as a group, the next slide, that we need to maximize the public benefits. We're talking about investing public money. We're all responsible as organizations within the community housing sector, particularly, for using public funds in a way that clearly aligns with public goals to answer what do we want to achieve with this. And we also know that it's important to figure out who follows whom. We know that the federal government may be the strongest, but it doesn't actually lead that well. Whereas at a local level, we can say, how are we spending resources and how do we strategically align them? We also want to know what results do we need, and are we satisfied with the results we're getting right now? And if we're not satisfied with the results that we're getting, how can we redeploy the investments that we're making? And who needs to make decisions? I know that this is the Mayor's Housing Task Force was very critical that you, as our local civic leaders, are actually quite engaged in this process. And that's what I appreciate about this team, is that what we can decide as a community here can actually inform the federal government's investments locally. The next slide is, we're all familiar with that with CMHC, the National Housing Strategy. Of course, the Rapid Housing Initiative just came out last week. The details just got announced. I know we're all scrambling to try to figure out how to deploy those. But these are the ways that, as different levels of government, or even as the community, the resources are out there, and it's a matter of how we can align them. The next slide. I just took some of these off the internet, so just recognize that we all can play a role in developing these projects. But it is very important that we have local support from our MPP, and we appreciate your presence here, as well as Minister Clark. And we know that Minister Clark has been to the riding and indeed the service management area more than once, and was here at the last housing day as well, supporting these kinds of investments. So the next slide is a couple of pictures of just projects that have been worked on, obviously. We know that as a community, we have experience building affordable housing. The next, okay, that one's great, thanks. Go to the next one. I think this is the key challenge we have as a joint application group, is how do we actually embrace a regional strategy? We don't want to make one-off investments that are sort of standalone and try to fit it, meet a need, but don't fit into some broader solution. What would it look like if we were to build 300 to 400 units of supportive housing in the next 5 years? This would not be one site, obviously. We're not talking about sort of concentrating everybody in one neighborhood, but also providing a full spectrum of supports. And this is where the joint application idea of us all working together could take a different shape. So there's a general rough budget. That's funny how the numbers didn't come through on there on the PDF. Sorry about that. Well, the colors represent sort of the main thing. CMHC grants, CMHC financing, you can see, is almost 50% of the project. The province has a key role to play for about 25%. As donor community, we can maybe have 10% of the project contributed from donors in the community. And then there is this gap. And is this gap, around 20% maybe? Something that the municipality contributes? Is it other ways of contributing? That's a key question that we can answer together. The next slide would represent, how can we actually have projects throughout the whole region? Brant County, there's needs in all of these communities. These are not suggested sites yet, but there are projects or sites potentially. We have the location map now. We can look at that. We can overlay with the needs throughout the region and say, what are the priorities and how do we work towards them in a more coordinated way? The next slide is a couple examples of what this can turn into. This is a project that Indwell is working on in Kitchener-Waterloo. It's converting an old church, St. Mark's Lutheran Church in downtown Kitchener, into 43 supported apartments for folks who are coming out of homelessness or out of hospital. The next slide shows the budget for that project. Again, unfortunately, the numbers didn't come through on the PDF, but they are on the PowerPoint version, which I did send a link to. If you'd like to get that, we can make sure that's part of the minutes. 43 apartments, high supports, community space, etc. Breaking down those investments according to the similar formula I mentioned earlier. The next slide is the key thing. We need to create capacity for growth, because as individual organizations, we can't keep competing with each other. We need to, and as individual municipalities, we need to be working in a way that's sort of delivering the outcomes that matter. We need to address these long-term needs, because we know that these have been long-term problems, and we need to have sustainable results. The key thing, and I think this one has become very apparent to all of us recently, we need to be ready for unexpected opportunities. The pandemic has opened many problems, but also different solution streams. And particularly as the federal government has invested in new ways through the National Housing Strategy, or the province through different pandemic-related homelessness things. How do we be ready for when these opportunities come up, so that we can seize the types of funding that we need to actually create permanent solutions, not just stopgaps? The next slide. When the community, we know that there's a pent-up demand from our community for solutions. People want to come together around ideas that are going to work. So that's a key support for all of us in the work that we're pursuing. The next slide is some of the projects that we have familiarity with recently in terms of constructing. We know how to get things designed. We know how to get things built. The next couple slides, I think that's a correct photo. Next slide is the fact, and I know I don't have all of our logos on here, but we have the collective experience and the collective capacity to work together. Some of us have already been talking numerous times as organizations about what would it look like to align our experience, to be able to build off of each other's strengths. Some provide support, some provide affordability. As municipalities, you've got strengths that none of us in the community have, and each of us can play a role in leveraging particularly CMHC's investment willingness. The final slide, I believe, or that's a construction photo. We have the skilled trades as well to be able to pull this all together. So I think the final slide, one more slide, is what we actually want to achieve. We want to achieve communities where everybody belongs, where we have nobody who's homeless, where we have nobody who's marginalized because of their illness or the disability, and fundamentally where, by working together, we can actually invest the resources that are available to permanent long-term results. So we're ready as organizations. We have abilities to pull this together, and we're encouraged that a framework of cooperation can lead to joint applications in the coming weeks, hopefully even, that could lead to long-term solutions. That's the end of the presentation there.
Thanks, Graham. I do have Councillor House. This question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Graham. Thank you very much for that presentation. Your experience and the experience of the other people around this group really helps to inform some of us who are new to this, and your familiarity with this space it's very helpful. Joint application success is I think going to be the key to a lot of this as we move forward. A couple of the slides in your presentation triggered a question in me, a question from me that it's been bouncing around in my head for a little while, and that one of your slides referenced some costing for one of your past projects, and I tried to do some quick calculations. I think it was around $317,000 per unit on one of the projects. And so I've seen in all of our different discussions on this subject, I've seen costs closer to $200,000 per unit. I've seen costs closer to $300,000 per unit, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around what's a reality number for us to be thinking as we move forward with our goals. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, please. Thank you.
To you, Mr. Chair. It's a very critical question, and it's hard to answer because the reality of the construction pricing, the market pricing, has been changing so quickly. We have 5 projects under construction right now in different municipalities, and we're seeing different costs in each of those related to the local market. It's not less than $300,000 per unit in any market we're seeing right now to build multi-residential, permanent, high-quality, energy-efficient housing. We are not building any like stick-built, two-story, single-family house size or apartment-sized units. So I don't have current experience pricing sort of a small-scale project. But for 50-unit, four-story type buildings, either wood frame or in concrete, I wouldn't budget less than 300,000. In fact, I would probably say 350 a unit, because we want to be flexible for a little bit of price escalation. The COVID pandemic we've seen this, housing prices have not dropped in the pandemic. There's massive pressure on the housing market, and trades availability has not improved. So I don't see big changes in the downward direction for the cost of construction, unfortunately, in the weeks ahead, maybe in the months ahead, years ahead, I'm not sure, but I would say 300,000 would be the minimum I would want to budget for multi-residential supportive housing built to a high quality standard.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Lorianne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thanks for that, Graham. A few comments. I wanted to pick up on the supportive versus affordable, because we talked about that in the mentorship task force presentation, where throughout the presentation, we were very careful to use the term affordable. The one quote that you mentioned does say supportive housing. We had that in there because the study was actually done around supportive housing, so we couldn't take out their quote. And the first slide to Graham's presentation says supportive housing. So I just want to make sure that we're all very clear that they are two different things. They can combine, you can do joint projects, but they are two different things and can sometimes qualify for two different types of funding or for different funding. Affordable housing is just assessed based on the percentage of the CMHC average market rent. Now, there's a great push for supportive housing right now in light of the impacts COVID has had on our most vulnerable. So there are additional funding streams to really focus on supportive housing. Those are the housing needs where the residents need a little bit more than just affordability. They need some wraparound, some support. That's why it's called supportive housing. So I just want to make sure that we don't ever use the terms interchangeably, because they are different and they can be different focuses. I noted that your funding's opportunity slide might be a great link to the comments that were made on our previous presentation about outlining the financing needed and the opportunities that were there. Also think the I Belong slide is absolutely great. I will say I found a lot of the other slides very much a sales pitch for Indwell, as opposed to the Brantford Mayor's task force look at coordinated funding efforts. It is mentioned on the last slide that there are a lot of organizations that are sort of ready, willing, and able, but throughout it was samples of Indwell, which is one of the reasons Victoria Park had wanted to share some of our costing analysis for our recent developments, but we thought it wasn't appropriate if it wasn't in your Brantford community, so we didn't include. Which leads me to the comment that Councillor House made and around the per door price, and I wanted to echo what Graham was saying. It also depends on the size of the units, if you're doing 3 bedrooms versus 1 bedroom supportive housing, as shown in the picture, one of the slides Graham presented. They can be like bachelor units for 1 bedroom supportive housing. That will be on a per door basis more economical to develop than a 3 bedroom affordable housing unit. But I want to say, let's not lose sight of the affordable housing component. Because yes, we need some supportive housing, but there are a lot of working people out in our community and on our wait list that have been waiting a long time for the affordable housing as well. So I just want to caution us on using the terms mixed in. And I can say that our newest development that we're underway, we are budgeting $405,000 per door, but it includes, it's large, it's a 367 unit development, but it goes from 1 bedrooms up to larger 3 and 4 bedroom units. So the cost is quite high now. What doesn't change, no matter where you analyze the finances, the pro formas at the end, is that you end up with a circle with, or I call it lasagna layers. You have a lot of layers to be able to make it work, and inevitably there is an equity contribution that is required. Those are all my comments on the presentation. Thank you.
Lorianne, the good comment about the affordable and supportive. So, for example, in your subgroup, I mean, it would strike me the target market for that would be those would be interested in doing affordable, because doing supportive takes a certain amount of expertise and ability to do that. Whereas I would think the joint application team probably more orientated toward the the Kiwanis, the JCs, the Indwells of the world that would have, and cities that would have that expertise. So kind of more targeted marketing. We're looking for partners, so, which makes a lot of sense. So that does mean you have to be careful about the words you use. So one question I have for you, Graham, in terms of hearing what Lorianne said, I'm sure you can mix the slides up to bring in other developments and other projects to capture that teamwork concept. But so what would be done with, like, where do we go from here, do you think, with this working group, given that its intent is, I guess, to foster joint applications?
Yeah, and I appreciate Lorianne's comments. I mean, the reality is that we're all so used to competing. We're all so used to responding to RFPs as individual organizations and trying to hustle to get our project to the front of the line. I use the photos from things that I'm familiar with because when I have them available, and two, I know I'm allowed to use them. But they're not there to represent the potential of collaboration, not the full extent of only who can develop. I think the key thing is that what we're seeing, especially in light of the fact that we're trying to use the federal government and the provincial capacity to create solutions, that we have to be ready to take chances together. We have to be ready to work together to seize opportunities like the Rapid Housing Initiative, to invest in the most critically, and never, that there is no organization that will individually, or no municipality or no private sector organization that will invest in the deepest affordability and the supports. And we can't get the supports unless we get Ministry of Health or Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing support dollars. And so we have to be able to figure out how to work together first, and then be able to sort of say, and we're going to do it in this way, and be ready. And I think that, to your question, Mayor Davis, what would be useful is if, as councils, we had a sense for your support for projects, kind of like while we wait for other programs, federal or provincial programs. Let's say, you've committed to DCs, or you've committed to such and such. So let's say we're going to work with Nova Vita, and we put in an application, and we put together a site. We know that we have this municipal contribution, and we have these service funds that we can get. Then while we wait for a project or a program from the feds or the province to come down, or while we push to get one announced, we keep working on the joint application in the background. It's a different approach to working together that is key. And it's not really, unfortunately, it's not really based on an RFP. You can't invent a partnership under the deadline of an RFP, is the key challenge. And so it's us working together before we have a funding model in place, in a sense, but with the confidence that we're going to get civic support for a solution once we get it developed. That's been our experience in other communities when it's more proactive. Otherwise, it's simply the competitive process that we're all familiar with. And I think that that would be the key change, is turning it from a competitive process to a collaborative process where we bring each other's skills to the table.
Well, Graham, let's remember what the end result is here, which is a task force report that goes to councils for their adoption. And I think what you're saying is there's a message, if that's the ultimate goal of this group, driving it to that task force report for council endorsement, perhaps from your subgroup, something that indicates what it is you're looking for from the councils, or something similar to what you just talked about, might be helpful.
We're
going to hear about that at 4.1.7. So I just threw that out there.
Okay.
All right. So I'm not seeing any other raised hands. Thank you very much, Graham. So let's move on to item 4.1, the industry partnerships team, and David Prang, talking about the private sector. And you did send a report to us. It's part of the agenda. Is there anything you wanted to say verbally before we ask if there are any questions?
I'll just highlight the 4 recommendations. One is, we'll be pretty quick. One is to incentivize the construction of all apartment dwellings and supply beyond the core area for the city of Brantford to intensification areas and corridors with a mechanism for more incentives that are tied to housing affordability. The idea is that there's an urban growth center, but that urban growth center is already tightly packed with a diversity of housing, and that diversity needs to continue in the areas that it's designated to do so, and to create some incentives to do so in that form or fashion, because we've heard that it's challenging to do so, particularly given the cost to develop housing of any type. Number 2 is to allow for more flexibility in some zoning categories for affordable housing development. And as has been mentioned already in this afternoon's comments, there's the NIMBYism issue and the negative responses from community members when private developers, with all good intentions and all good plans that meet the municipality's requirements, come to a meeting. It's community meetings that lead to polarized outcomes, just because of the term and the nature of affordable housing. So coming up with some zoning categories that are for minor issues such as corridor size, to have some more flexibility in those types of developments. As I already mentioned, to incentivize, the third recommendation rather is to incentivize diverse and more intensified housing options in the urban growth center. So it's making use of the limited urban space and trying to grow up and not out. And then finally, number 4 is to investigate ways to incentivize the creation of secondary suites. So understanding that's the city and the county have both started those types of initiatives, and want to continue that type of those types of developments that create more housing that is in that range that's a little bit more affordable. One of the things that we had raised earlier was the discussion of purpose-built student housing, and whether there should be a certain density of a minimum maximum per hectare in areas around the post-secondary education to minimize the oversupply of one type or form of housing, given that the experience in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, where the municipality encouraged high density student housing to reduce the impact on neighborhoods. Unfortunately, in these current unfortunately, then it was overbuilt even pre-COVID and pre the sort of the distance ed kind of thing. So given the city of Waterloo's experience, the current situation, and the feedback from Laurier that's already been shared this afternoon, we thought of it and wanted to make sure that it was noted that this is an area of discussion to be aware of, but no particular recommendations at this time regarding student housing as a piece. So generally speaking, incentives could look at faster approval processes and less red tape, and then develop various different tools within the development charges and community improvement plan types of incentives. So the goal mainly from the private sector is to create a healthy community with a sufficient supply and range of housing to meet the housing needs of City of Brantford and the County of Brant, and looking at being fair to the development community, but also including appropriate scale and density and income mix in housing that's developed across our two communities. So pleased to answer any questions in terms of what the discussion looked like from the industry partners part of this group.
Councillor Weaver has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, David. Did you happen to have a conversation with Laurier about what their inventory of student housing is currently in Brantford? And I appreciate they don't own it, but people are renting out to students. What the capacity is and how much is actually being used now this year because of COVID? And if they've actually taken a look at that inventory and decided that they don't maybe need as much now because of online learning possibilities.
So the easiest answer is yes to some of those questions and no to some of those questions. I understand. So yes, we had a conversation as best that we could with Laurier's senior admin and what their current grasp is of the situation in the community. So this included Heidi Northwood, Tony Rougeau, and Adam Lawrence, as well as the director of housing at Laurier, Chris Dodd. So sort of pulling together, and actually Beth Gurney as well, who's their I think the associate director of communications. So in the conversation with the group of Laurier admin, my understanding is the general inventory right now is primarily is almost exclusively targeted at first year resident students. Those numbers with both owned as well as leased beds with Laurier include about 520 owned and leased beds, primarily targeted to first year students. So if you sort of work those numbers, those 500-ish beds incorporate probably, and they don't have a strong grasp on, like those beds are primarily targeted to out of town first year students. And I understand the capacity to be, between 25 and 50% right now. They don't have an interest or a plan at this point to flex that around the COVID issues. They're doing the best they can based on the current circumstances. As noted, they don't plan to build any more within the next 5 years at least. And sort of their numbers to build are consistent, if not even higher than what's been quoted this afternoon in terms of a per bed cost. So the question around what does that mean in terms of the students in the community, both with my professional experience and with what sort of the limited insight that Laurier has on what's there right now. There are some smaller purpose-built student housing units of, I think, to 156 and 158 Colburn. There's also 142 Nelson, and then a more recent development on Dalhousie that's approximately 100 beds. Those types of purpose-built student housing pieces, it's likely that as the campus grows, there may be more of those smaller 20 to 40 bed types of units. But in terms of what the number of students living in the community, it's very hard to gauge because students aren't required to report officially where they live. And for the university to run those numbers, it's also very, very difficult. It's not a question that they ask, like, do you live on campus or off campus, or on campus in Brantford or off campus at home? And most students may just use their home address, whether it's Hamilton or Ottawa or wherever. So it's not really something that they've really ever tracked in my experience. But you can start doing the math, probably somewhere between 70 and 80% of students in first year live in residence. So those first year student numbers are like 700 students. And then if you extrapolate that sort of adds up to Laurier and Conestoga's overall student numbers of between 2,000 and 3,000 students. So you've got probably somewhere in the magnitude of 1,500 to 2,000 students living off campus in Brantford. But that's really a really big gap and a really big guess because they don't know like who's commuting from Haldimand, Norfolk, or any of our surrounding communities, right? So difficult to manage the off-campus piece, and that's not a unique issue to 2020. That's a consistent challenge is measuring who lives off campus and where across most post-secondary institutions, in my experience.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you very much, David. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you very much for that presentation. So we'll now move to the last item, which is 4.1.7, discussion regarding a draft final report. And as I said previously, that is the ultimate goal of a task force, which is preparing a report that's has the input from all of the participants, and then it goes to councils for their approval. And I'm thinking probably we've got a council meeting on December 17th. I think my goal would be to try and get a report to that council meeting for approval, or alternatively the next one, which would be in the end of January, the last Tuesday in January. And hopefully I believe the county kind of follows a similar schedule and could be done as well there. So Mary Ellen McLennan, I know you've sent us earlier this week an initial draft. Where would you like us to go from here? What would you like to say about it today? So I can anticipate we'd have another meeting, probably really, I would think early in December, actually might be December 10th, and really focused on finishing that section off and approving it. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, what you have received is indeed a very rough draft. We understand that there's a lot of text and it's visually difficult at this point, but we wanted to make sure that we included all of the information that we've received to date so far from all of the project teams and all the fine work that has been done. But be assured that the next report at the final meeting will be very polished and streamlined with many more graphics. Today, we're hoping to get your comments on some of the actions and recommendations. But before we get there, I would like to say that will be one of the areas that you would see the most significant change. And that is on the final task force recommendations to council. Right now, we have them all listed directly. How we anticipate, with your permission, of course, is to actually create an action plan that will be attached to that final document. That action plan, as Mayor Davis noted earlier, would become the roadmap. So it becomes a living, breathing document that we can refer to as we push ahead in the creation of affordable housing. That particular action plan, which would be the outcome of the Mayor's Housing Partnership Task Force, would feed into the Brantford Housing Master Plan. And that is the approach to developing affordable housing. And that would feed into the overarching plan, which is the Brantford Brand Housing Stability Plan. We'll also show that graphic within the final report so we can see exactly where the work of this task force will live and how we will continue to ensure that that action plan is worked on. The action plan will not be a list of recommendations. It'll be placed under the goals of the task force. It'll be aligned with the goals of the task force. It will have timelines associated with each recommendation and the anticipated outcomes, as well as a status, so that we can follow year over year the work of the action plan. So that's kind of how we see the final report coming to you. Today, I was hoping that we could get some comments and your observations on anything we may have missed in our long list of recommendations and the work that has been done. So we're looking at some comments on the actions and the recommendations, if that's acceptable.
And Mary Ellen, it's not limited to comments today. If I can compare it to the Economic Recovery Task Force we did earlier this year, a very similar structure. And many of the really important, significant comments would come into staff, the Economic Development Department, after a meeting or before the next meeting. But we do have a deadline here. We are trying to move this forward. So the floor is here for questions. Councillor Weaver's raised his hand. So Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mary Ellen, so when we get to a point where we've got this completed and we have sort of a roadmap to get places built. So along the city's process to do this, is there any gaps that you see where I guess throughput, as far as where we may get into like a bottleneck situation just because our city processes are a bit more complicated, or just might slow some of these builds down? Like, does the city staff have the capacity to sort of walk these projects through the process so we can get them built as soon as possible?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely. We'll certainly outline the challenges within the report, and there are challenges, no question. I think they've been identified in the project teams, and clearly we will identify our current challenges. One is additional financing, although the finance team has done an amazing job of being able to lay that out for us so that we can move forward. We have challenges of land that we're bottlenecked in this community. So, but that being said, once we get through those challenges of land and dollars, we have the capacity to build. We have a great team surrounding us. The Housing Services has a great team. We have a great planning team, a great real estate team. So together we can make some of this happen once we have that roadmap through. We'll also be, as an outcome of this particular piece of work, we're hoping to outline many of these units within our, at least for municipal purposes, within our 10-year capital plan. So they'll be laid out in there. So we actually be able to see what we plan to accomplish municipally, and through the housing stability plan, we'll be able to see what we can accomplish with our partners, and we'll report on that annually.
Thank you very much.
I see Mr. Hutchings, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see earlier I'm doing double duty here. I had another call, a very important call at the same time, and I see Joelle stepped in and answered for me. I could see her face on the screen while I was on my phone, so I apologize for that. But Mary Ellen, I just want the information that's in this report on the finance section. I think it's from 2 meetings ago, not the last meeting, and maybe we can talk about the update version we have regarding finance. I think we're there. From a financing strategy from the city's point of view. And so I think we need to update that. So we'll talk to you offline about that and how we should position that. So, but I just want to apologize as missing my cue as the chair, and thanks for Joelle, and also let Mary Ellen know we can update this a little bit because it's a couple months old. And I think last time we basically decided we do have the money to go ahead. Thank you.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On specific to the recommendations, about halfway down the page 18, it says that city staff continues discussion with the County of Brant in order to fund new affordable housing development opportunities in the County of Brant. I think it would help further our cause in presenting this to our council if in that spot we took the opportunity to provide some more details on the Trillium opportunity, and because in other parts of the report we have talked about some other specific properties in Brantford. I think it would be again helpful to our cause if we just went in a little bit further into the next steps for Trillium, if it is indeed something that we see happening in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, we could absolutely flesh out that section and add more information on the proposed build. We are in discussion with the county, as you're aware, and we hope to have that finalized, but we can certainly put more details within there on the proposed Trillium build.
Again, I don't see any raised hands, but I know, for example, I've not had a chance to sit down with Mary Ellen myself, and I certainly will be doing that probably next week to kind of give my input on this particular plan. And as I said, I welcome anyone who is looking at this to certainly be in touch with the housing staff, Mary Ellen, as we fine tune the report. So the goal then would be, which takes us to item 4.3, is a future meeting date. And we're suggesting that be December 10th at 2 p.m. The reason for that is will give us some time to polish off and the task force report, get that out earlier for, I guess, some further comment. And then hopefully on the 10th, we can then move forward to approve that or make any final versions. That would then allow us to maybe bring it to council December 17th, the Brantford City Council, but if not, certainly in January. So mark in your calendars, it's set for December 10th at 2 p.m., same format. Now we do have a couple of administrative matters. We have some minutes of our previous meetings that have not been approved. So I'm looking for a motion to approve our minutes of the August 20th meeting and the October 1st, 2020 meeting. And they were previously distributed and attached to the agenda. So I can get a move to that, moved by Councillor Weaver. I can get a seconder to adopt the minutes. Someone has to raise their hand. Physically raise your hand, please. Councillor House, thank you. Any discussion on the form and content? Seeing none. Please raise your hand if you're objecting to approving the minutes. That's physically raising your hand. Good, I'm not seeing anybody doing that. So clerk's happy to mark then that the minutes have been approved, duly approved. We don't have any resolutions, no notices of motion. So again, we're going to adjourn then to December 10th. Again, I please, I very much encourage you. There's some very knowledgeable partners on the task force. Your comments regarding, sorry, I think we saw Mayor Bailey. Did you want to? Yes, Mayor Bailey, and then Councillor Weaver in terms of final closing comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have had my hand up a few times. I don't know if
You got to use that raised hand button. Sorry,
well, you know what? I don't have a raised hand button, but I was waving like a madman. But anyway, it doesn't matter now. I'm speaking now. I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank everyone for all the work that they put into this report. It's an amazing report. I always get very excited when I listen to Lorianne talk about housing. You do a wonderful job. And I was glad to see Graham's report. I am familiar with most of the shots that you saw today. I've visited most of those places. And there is a difference between a Chevelle and a Cadillac. And I mean, if you are pricing and for pricing things out, you have to understand what he's delivering every day of the week is a Cadillac, and his wraparound services are flawless. So I'm very encouraged that he came to the table. I'm glad that he made his presentation because I understand what he's selling and I understand what he stands for as far as the integrity of his company. So I was really very glad to see the report. And what you guys have done here is really a lot of work, a lot of good work. So I'm excited about the housing project, and I'm excited with the partnership. So thank you very much.
I apologize, Mayor Bailey. I've got two computer screens here. One's a participant box, and I often stare at that one. So suitably admonished. I should
it wasn't a lot of it wasn't a lot of times, Mayor Davis. It was only 3 times.
Okay, well, I'll remember that you don't have the raise hand button. Councillor Weaver, I think did you raise your hand in terms of no? Okay. Not seeing anyone waving at me. But I did want to thank Andy. I think this is the first time you've joined us. Maybe did back in the summer. But again, certainly in the final report, anything from your perspective, brand new housing that you think might be added in there, we certainly welcome that. I know we haven't had a specific discussion regarding that, but I think it's important to know that what input or perspective you might have for us at the councils to assist in what it is your organization is doing as well. So, and if you want, maybe on the 10th, we can set aside a little bit of time for that as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned to December 10th, 2 p.m. Please stay safe. We are experiencing a resurgence in the virus locally. I think we all got to be a little more disciplined in how we interact with one another. Certainly, this is a very safe